This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
Okay. Bismillahi walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome. Thank you for bringing your heart to these weekly halaqas for your spiritual and emotional growth. So every week, I'm going to take a topic that benefits us mentally and emotionally and then bring it to you from a psychological and spiritual lens, or I'm going to talk about a spiritual concept within our faith and then give you the benefit of it psychologically as well. So I like to do that merge where, you take away something that empowers you mentally, but also spiritually. So last week we talked about presence, right? And the importance of being present. And remember at the end, I mentioned that dhikr is a great way to be present. Do you guys remember that? Yeah. Okay. So today I wanted to divulge a little bit more deeply into the psycho-spiritual power of dhikr. When I say psycho-spiritual, I mean the merge of the psychological and spiritual power, right, of dhikr, something that is such a key concept in our faith and a key aspect of our worship. But a lot of us are disconnected from its power on a spiritual level, but also psychologically as well. So dhikr is literally translated as the remembrance, right? It's the remembrance of Allah. And it's an act of worship in the form of repeated phrases or prayers, okay? And so dua is a form of dhikr because through dua, we are remembering Allah, right? When we supplicate, it's a prayer in the form of supplication or calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you have asma Allah, right? Another form of dhikr is to repeat the names of Allah, right? The names of Allah are known in Arabic as asma Allah. And as far as we know, there are 99 names of Allah, right? We're presented within Islamic teachings, and they each explain an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. And so dua, let's talk about dua first a little bit. Dua is a prayer it's defined as a prayer of invocation, supplication, or request, even asking for help or assistance from Allah, right? And Nu'man ibn Bashir reported that the Prophet ﷺ said supplication is worship itself, right? And then the Prophet ﷺ recited the verse, "Your Lord says, call upon me and I will respond to you. Verily, those who disdain my worship will enter hell in humiliation." So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so he followed up supplication and is worship itself with the ayah in chapter 40, verse 60, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Your Lord says, call upon me, id'uni astajib lakum, right? Very direct. Call upon me, I will answer you. So that is dua. And then the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we refer to them as asma Allah or sifat Allah, right? Sifat is like the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So according to the Islamic tradition, there are 99 names of Allah, and each of them reflect an attribute and a way to understand Allah and to call upon Allah. Okay, so as Muslims, we're encouraged to learn the names and attributes of Allah and to demonstrate those divine traits with not only humanity, but, and all of God's creation. But the key that we miss here is also with ourselves, right? A lot of us, when we learn the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're taught to, okay, Allah is merciful, be merciful with others. But we miss the part of we are Allah's creation too. Are we practicing the attributes of Allah with ourselves? When Allah is the most compassionate, the most merciful, are we compassionate and merciful with our own souls, with our own selves? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, to God belongs the best names, so call upon Him using them. So in the Quran, Allah tells us to call upon Him using these names, using the names that He has taught us, because He wants you to know Him, right? And that is a sign of love, is that, when you love someone, you want them to know who you are. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been very transparent about who He is by giving us these 99 names, describing His attributes, his sifat. So the spiritual power of dhikr, and then of course, the other form of dhikr is when we repeat different glorifications, praises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say alhamdulillah, we say subhanallah, right? Any way that you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is the spiritual power of remembering Allah? Number one, you remember what is true and important, right? When you remember Allah, you're remembering everything. Why? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us the opposite of? Forgetting Allah, right? And what does He tell us happens when you forget Allah? Do not be like those. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, do not be like those who forgot Allah. He made them forget themselves. So when you forget the source, you forget what you need. If an infant forgets their mom, right, hypothetically, right, he doesn't get access to what he needs, correct? When you forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you say, I don't need Allah, or, astaghfirullah, we just like, we treat ourselves as our own lords, as a source of ourselves, you suffer because you need Allah. You just cut off your access to the source of everything you need. So the opposite is true. When you remember Allah, you remember what you need. You remember the nourishment you need. You remember what you were created for. You remember what serves you spiritually, mentally, emotionally. You remember what you need to thrive holistically, right? So it increases your consciousness of Allah and your awareness of His power and presence in your life. That's what dhikr does. It builds a closeness between you and Allah. When you love someone, you want to remember them, right? Like, you think of when someone loves the other, they think of, okay, what does that person like? They're thinking of that person. They're remembering that person. They don't forget that person. They don't leave. It's not out of mind, out of heart, right? That person is not out of mind and out of heart. And so in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and when my servant asks you concerning me, indeed I am near. I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me. So let them respond to me and believe in me that they may be guided. So dhikr helps you remember your need of Him, and it's a great expression of love. So let's talk about the psychology of dhikr. Dhikr is a restructuring tool for your mind and a redirecting tool for your heart. And this is a statement I use a lot in my work after not only, providing therapy over the years to Muslims, but also in looking at psychology from an Islamic perspective and looking at these different, aspects of worship through a psychological lens and seeing how does this line up with, like, for example, cognitive behavioral psychology and all the Western psychology methods that we utilize. And so dhikr is a great cognitive tool. And this actually came up in my research. My dissertation was on looking at an Islamic psychological view to psychotherapy. So what I did was I interviewed therapists who integrate Islamic teachings into their therapy approaches and seeing what has benefited clients. Dhikr was a huge one. And it was a huge, factor that was in line with a behavioral approach, the two psychological approaches, CBT, cognitive behavioral psychology, and mindfulness. And so it changes your brain and shifts your mental frame. And it's an elevated and greater form of affirmation. We know in the psychology and self-help world, they utilize affirmations, right? And it's a big thing. People will sit and affirm what is true. They'll sit and affirm what they think will benefit them, psychologically, mentally, emotionally. Dhikr can do that. And I look at it as a higher form of even affirmations because you're including the source of who you need, of what you need. So, and I want to share some, results that I found in my study. So all participants found it helpful to implement dhikr into their psychotherapy approach. So out of, that was like 100% of all the participants found dhikr to be beneficial. So one participant stated that dhikr is a hugely beneficial tool for cognitive restructuring. And then another participant, when talking about the benefits of dhikr, another participant stated, basically dhikr, replacing negative thoughts with a phrase that connects them back to the submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is a hugely beneficial tool for cognitive restructuring, or there's a lot of different ways of calling it in Western psychology, but essentially our minds, the human mind, perseverates on things. And if you don't insert a positive thing to perseverate on, it's more likely that it's going to perseverate on a negative thought, right? So this is what people are now finding to be the most helpful thing in researching psychology. And it's something that has been an integral part of daily life of a Muslim since the beginning. This was a key finding as well. So just again, a reiteration of how even therapists who integrate Islam into their therapy approach find that concepts like this that have been in our faith, right, from the very beginning are so beneficial. They can bring psychological benefit to their clients. Another participant stated that dua has a cognitive shifting approach, right? And they said there's a cognitive formation. There's a dua, this prescriptive way of forming the mind. Obviously, it's not just on the tongue. It's supposed to be internalized, that if you create a mindfulness of these duas, that itself is a treatment as well, right? So many different benefits of dhikr. But let's look at, I want to really connect your heart to how it just benefits your mind. So we know that our brain has a level of neuroplasticity, right? And this changes as we get older. But for the most part, the brain maintains this level of neuroplasticity, right? Which means that it's the ability of neural networks in the brain to change, form, and reorganize new connections, particularly in response to learning experiences or following trauma. So your brain has this immense power of changing and adapting. And that's the plasticity component, right? It's malleable, it's movable, right? And this is such a great miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this amazing tool that is able to learn new things and adjust to new things and interpret new things, right? And so it's something that we need to be connected to, that every time you learn something new or you redirect your mind, you are contributing to your brain's ability to positively change and transform, right? And studies show that affirmations, meditations, the practice of gratitude contribute to positive brain changes. So then imagine dhikr, right? If affirmations, gratitude checks on their own, outside of including Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, are beneficial. Imagine then when you include the process with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's so much more powerful. There's the concept that is added, an immense factor that is added, which is what? Barakah, blessing. Imagine then your brain, right? Imagine that power, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shifts it, how Allah can put barakah in how you think, right? And this is something we should always ask Allah. Allah, put barakah in my mind, put barakah in my thoughts, put barakah in how I view things. Help me view things and interpret things in a way that is pleasing to you, in a way that benefits me spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. Right? So affirmations, they're short and powerful statements that are constructed to help you be more conscious and in control of what you think and how you direct your thoughts, right? And we know that negative thoughts impact your emotions, behaviors, and reality. And we know that the brain is more prone to negative thinking than positive thinking. So this is why this work is so important. And this is why dhikr is so powerful, because when you say dhikr, right, when you intercept a negative thought with dhikr, you're shifting, right? You're redirecting. You're not letting it, go from one small thought to catastrophizing. You're not letting it, spiral. And Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, talks to us about, he teaches us this, right? He says, if you don't nip an evil or, negative thought at its bud, that thought turns into, feelings, then behaviors, right? It affects your actions. I'm paraphrasing, but it says it has this effect that it actually goes into how you behave. And this is something that we know in cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And this is why I used a lot of Ghazali in my work, because Ghazali's work in my work, because, this concept of circumstance, CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral psychology, they say that it's not the circumstance that allows you to feel a negative way, that it's your thought about the circumstance. So you have a circumstance. So two people can go through the same circumstance, right? One person thinks about it in a way that produces a negative feeling, and another person thinks about it in a way that produces a positive feeling, or a feeling that is at least more helpful, right? So we forget this power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, the power to choose our thoughts, the power to choose how we think, the power to direct our minds, right? To redirect our thinking, the power to pause and say, how am I interpreting this experience? How am I, deriving meaning from this experience? How am I, explaining this experience to myself? What am I associating this experience with? Am I associating it with my value, my worth, So there's so much power in this, and dhikr and dua, they help you affirm what is true and channel your thoughts in the most positive direction and the best of destinations, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who can actually help you, achieve that shift and give you a solution to that problem. So there's affirming du'as, right, that help us. An example of this is the dua of when we call upon Allah as a source of peace, right? So Aisha reported, radiallahu anha, when the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, finished his prayer, he would not sit long enough but to say, Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam tabarakta wa ta'alayta ya dha jalali wal ikram. Oh Allah, you are the source of peace, and from you is peace. Blessed are you, the majestic and noble. I've used this dua with working with Muslims before, and I can tell you that, it has helped clients really sit with that concept of, I'm calling upon the source of my peace right now, and to sit with it the same way you would sit with an affirmation, the same way you would build the muscle of a meditation. How many of us sit with these amazing tools, prescriptions that were given to us in our faith, right? That not only are you inviting that experience of peace, but you're calling upon the source of peace, because that is one of Allah's names. He has called himself as-Salam. He is the source of peace. So whenever you feel distress, whenever you feel you are lacking inner peace, I encourage you to use this. Oh Allah, you are the source of peace, and from you is peace, right? And then you glorify him at the end. Dhikr is a great way to help us redirect our emotions. I always say that one of the most powerful blessings we have as Muslims, especially being a therapist, is something that I've seen, is that we have the ability to gain from Allah what we did not get from the world, right? When you work with people who, for example, didn't have good upbringings, didn't have good parents, didn't have parents who gave them what was rightfully theirs, whether it's love or validation, right? A sense of self, right? When people go through experiences that they didn't get what they needed, when people are going through experiences where they don't have what they need, where they don't have love, where they don't have peace, where they don't have whatever it is that they're lacking. As Muslims, we have the opportunity to gain from Allah what we do not get from the world. And the perfect example of this is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When you study the seerah, you think to yourself, we know everything is done with purpose, especially for a Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Like the design of his life, the design of his childhood. You think about this, like he never had a parent long enough to take care of him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the Arabic language, we use the word Rabb to refer to the parents or the head of the household, right? Rabb al-Bayt, we say, it's interesting because in the Quran, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to himself sometimes as Ilah, and other times he refers to himself as Rabb, right? So what's the difference? The scholars say that Ilah is more in terms of who you worship, right? And then Rabb has the more caretaking qualities, right? Like we know in Surah Al-Baqarah, in Surah Al-Fatiha, Rabb al-Alameen, right? The Lord of the worlds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that he takes, he's not just taking care of you, he takes care of all the worlds that exist. So Rabb has a caretaking quality. It's the one who nourishes. It's the one who raises you, rears you, right? Takes care of you, looks over you, right? And in Arabic, we refer to parents as Rabb al-Bayt, not of the Alameen, not of the world, but of the home, right? So the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his father died before he was born in a patriarchal society, right? Where people gained that respect by who your father is, right? And so then afterwards, his mother died also when he was young. Then he was given to his grandfather, and his grandfather died. And you think, we reflect upon this in the seerah. What is the wisdom behind this? And so by creating this experience, who became his direct Rabb? Who became his most powerful Rabb? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah was his direct Rabb, rearing him from the very beginning, right? Being so close to him from the very beginning. Allah is all of our Rabb, right? But you see the design of this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, created this direct connection with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so powerful, and you see this when he would retreat and he would go to the cave of Hira, right? And he would, reflect and meditate. It was something that was instilled in him to long for his Rabb. And so did he get with Allah what he lacked in his childhood? Absolutely. He got more from Rabb al-Alameen than he got from Rabb al-Bayt. And I know this is hard because, it's not to say that the pain of not having parents wasn't there. Of course it was. That's actually part of his compassion, right? He had such a deep compassion for orphans, to children who didn't have parents, right? And this is, we should learn to look at our lives as how did my test contribute to the positive qualities I have? Or how can I look at my test as a way to build positive qualities, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us about him. And we learn from Islam that there's this opportunity to gain from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what we lack. And using his names, and one of my teachers used to say that whatever you're going through in life, look for the name of Allah that he is connecting you to through that test. So you might be going through a difficulty where you need to connect more to Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. You're like, you know what? That's the name I need to hold on to. The most compassionate, the most merciful. You might be going through another test. You connect more to Ar-Raqib, the watchful. As-Sami'a, the one he hears. You don't feel heard. You connect more to As-Sami'a, the all-hearing. Feeling unseen and unvalidated. As-Sami'a al-Basir, the all-hearing, the all-seeing. Right? Everyone wants to feel seen and heard. There's a positive psychological impact on feeling seen and heard by those we love, right? Imagine then if you can access that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The all-hearing, the all-seeing. Feeling unloved, al-Wadud, the one who has named himself the most loving. Now think about this. Imagine if, all the benefits you get from feeling loved by a human being and loving a human being. Imagine then the benefits you can get on a mental, emotional, spiritual level when you feel loved by the creator of love, by the source of love, right? Lack of self-compassion, you feel like you're very self-critical of yourself. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Feeling a heaviness or constriction in your heart, Allah has named himself Al-Basit, the one who expands, the one who gives abundantly, not just outside of us, but internally. You feel like you're going through a process and you're healing, whether it's from physical wounds, emotional wounds, trauma. Allah is a Shafi, the healer, right? And I know a lot of times we think of this just in terms of physical illness, right? We think of Allah being a Shafi when it comes to people's physical illness, but we forget that everyone has wounds, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, right? It's still any kind of healing that is needed. Remember that Allah is a Shafi. Burdened by the past, Allah is a Tawwab al-Ghafur, right? Unappreciated, Allah is a Shakur. What is one thing that everyone wants to feel? Appreciated, right? Allah has named himself the most appreciative. How many of us are connected to that? That this person doesn't appreciate me, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabb al-Alameen, appreciates me. That you do the smallest thing good and you see more good coming to you. You walk towards Allah by this much, he walks towards you by a greater amount, right? A distance. We know this from Hadith Qudsi. If my servant comes to me by an arm's length, I go to him, by a hand's length, I go to him by an arm's length. If my servant comes to me walking, I go to him running, right? So Allah is the most appreciative. This is actually one of my favorite names because it just shows you how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what you get from him will never be what we actually have earned. And it's out of his mercy, right? That you do this much, you come closer to him by this much, you find that he's coming closer to you by far more. And that's so beautiful to know because the human beings, a lot of people are not like that, right? Right? You go to them by this, they just give you enough, right? But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you do this much and he does this much for you. And if anything, if you think about even our existence, what did we do to get eyes that see, right? Ears that hear, emotions that feel, right? What did we do to be formed? what did we do to have beauty in this universe? We didn't do much, but Allah did it for us, right? Not feeling enough. This is a huge one. Al-Mughni, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has named himself Al-Mughni, the one who enriches, the one who nourishes. So we have this opportunity to gain from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what we feel we are lacking. And this is the power of dhikr, is that you remember Allah through all your conditions. You look at what you have to access with Allah through every phase of your life. And this is why tests have so much to offer us, that times of ease do not offer us the same. And even Helen Keller mentions this, that her difficulties gave her, I'm paraphrasing, but she talks about how difficulties give an opportunity for transformation that times of ease do not give you. And this is true. We all know this, right? This is a universal truth. People become their truest self out of hardships, right? People become, they learn what is true, what is real in their life through their difficult times. They learn of their strength during their difficult times. So when we look at tests as having something to offer us, and we look at them as opportunities to get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask different questions. It's no longer, why is this happening to me? No, what is Allah trying to teach me through this test? What name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is He introducing me to through this test? What is Allah introducing me to about Himself and also about me, right? Because that's what we know is the purpose of tests. It's to bring truth to the surface. The truth of your faith, the truth of your claims, the truth of who you are, the truth of your belief, right? So with dhikr, it's something that we have it's one of the easiest things to do, but the most rewarding, most beneficial, most impactful. And we were designed to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, remember me, I will remember you, right? And I really love this story of Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, who he had left his town. He wanted to go away to a place where he was not known. And he ended up going to this masjid, and he was very well known at the time in all these areas. And he wanted to go to a place, just a new area where he wasn't known, where people didn't recognize him. And so he went to this masjid and he wanted to rest. And the person who was overlooking the masjid didn't want him. He didn't recognize Imam Ahmad, and he kept telling him to leave. So he didn't let him enter the masjid. So Imam Ahmad went to rest in the courtyard. He came and he started dragging away Imam Ahmad from the courtyard. He doesn't know who he is, but even if he doesn't know who he is, it's not okay to do that, right? So imagine Imam Ahmad could have said, I'm Imam Ahmad, right? Like, who do you think you are? How are you treating me this way? But look what Allah does for him. A baker was nearby, a local man who was a baker, and he comes and he says, I can take this man with me to stay with me, right? To rest. So Imam Ahmad follows this man all the way back to his home, but he notices something unique about this man. He notices that in the entire time, this man did not stop remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was in a state of dhikr the entire time. So when he went to the man's house, he asked him a question. He said, what benefit did you see from this dhikr, from this constant state of dhikr you're in? He said, I saw that there's no dua I asked from Allah except that He granted me it, except one dua that I made. He said, what is this dua? He said, I always asked Allah to allow me to see Imam Ahmad, right? And Allah brought Imam Ahmad to him. This is a well-known story to show the power of the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, remember me, I will remember you. Kuruni athkurukum. Right? That when you're in a constant state of remembering your creator will never forget your needs. Whenever you put Allah first, He puts everything that you left second to Him, He prioritizes for you. And this we see as, many people can attest this. And I want you to try it, try it for a week where remembering Allah is your priority, where you tell yourself, by the end of the day, I want to make sure that I at least did maybe 100 istighfar or something that you feel you it's doable for you, you know. Then there's a verse in Surah Taha where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and whoever turns away from my remembrance, indeed he will have a difficult life, and we will gather him on the day of resurrection blind. So subhanAllah, there's this relationship between forgetting Allah and you having a difficult life, because Allah is not in need of our remembrance, right? It's almost like, I always give this example of, people always say like, well, why do we have to do this? Why is Allah like, like, why is there such a consequence to me not doing an act of worship, right? And I always say, remember a parent to their child, okay? A mother will sometimes put a consequence on an action and not put a consequence on another action. Isn't that right? Any parents in here? No? Okay. Well, you guys were children, so you guys could still think about this. And so, a mother will sometimes say, okay, if my child doesn't do this, it's okay, I'm not going to give him a consequence. But if my child does not do this one thing, no, I have to give him a consequence. What's the difference? One action, if the child doesn't do it, it doesn't harm the child as much, right? But another action, she knows that if the child doesn't do it, it harms the child. Does it harm her? No, it harms the child. For example, eating dinner, right? If you don't come to eat dinner, if you don't come to eat, no dessert. There's a consequence there, right? So we know in the psychology of learning that children learn either through the hope of a reward or the fear of a consequence. This is basic, like the psychology of how we learn, right? Hope and fear are driving forces psychologically, even for us as adults. We do things out of hope for something, or we do it or we don't do something or do it out of fear of what? The consequence. So a mother will tell her child, look, what's the reward for eating dinner? Dessert. What's the consequence? No dessert. What is she trying to do? She's hoping that if the child does not come out of hope for the reward, the child will come out of fear of the consequence. But what's the end result? My child comes and eats. He gets what he needs. This is the same when we read verses like this and we see whoever turns away from my remembrance, he will have a difficult life, right? What is Allah? He's trying to tell you the consequence. Not for him. No, so you can come to the table, right? You could get what you need. It's the same thing with prayer. Prayer is salat, sila, right? It's your link. It comes from the word link between you and your creator. Why is the consequence for not praying? Why is it the first thing we're asked about, right? When we meet Allah, because it's your lifeline. It's your umbilical cord, right? And so when you don't pray, you don't get what you need. You cut off yourself from the source. So whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribes for us, it has to offer us something great. And dhikr is one of the most powerful tools we can have to empower ourselves, not only spiritually, but mentally and emotionally. And so that is all I have for today. And now I want to really take any questions you have, also thoughts, reflections, what comes up for you when you learn about this, or when you think about the power of dhikr, what role does dhikr play in your lives? So we can open it up for discussion and questions. Well, what do you think is a barrier for a lot of people, or even for you, that keeps you from having a consistent regimen of dhikr or remembering Allah? What are some things that you think comes up as a barrier for a lot of people? Yeah. So we actually broke it down earlier, but just to like summarize, it's basically like dhikr means remembering, right? Or remembrance, right? And so to remember someone is either by their names, right? When you remember someone, you remember their names, right? You remember their qualities, right? You call them. If you remember someone, you call them, right? It's the same thing with Allah. When you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you call upon him, you make dua, you pray, you supplicate, you want to connect with him, right? He's on your mind, he's on your heart, you want to connect. That's what usually follows remembrance, right? When you remember someone you love, you want to connect with them. So you want to create a link. You want to either remember their name, remember their qualities that you love, remember to speak to them, right? To be spoken to. So we speak to Allah through dua. We are spoken to through the Quran, right? Prayer. And then also we are taught like all different, like, subhanallah, la ilaha illallah, and those all have their own meanings. But dhikr is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I have a question regarding, so you said in Surah Taha, if you don't remember Allah, life becomes difficult for you. So what about like the atheists and stuff? A lot of them, they seem to be happier and stuff. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Right. From the outside. And this is the biggest delusion of shaitan, right? It's like, oh, look at those who don't remember Allah, right? I mean, I can tell you that like how do we define happiness, right? I mean, even let's take like the top celebrities. Every day you hear of like the addictions, the divorces, it's the illusion, right? It's the illusion of happiness. And it's also how we define happiness. Is happiness by wealth? Is happiness by, my teacher used to say that some of the most happiest people he knows are the poorest people he knows, that he'd visit and they'd have so little and they're just like, alhamdulillah, they're so grateful, right? They're given so little. And so we have to understand that like, it's very easy to that's a common deception, right? Of this world is that's happiness, and that's, look at that. And they don't know Allah. And also we really minimize how much society is programming us to disconnect from Allah. I mean, I was just thinking about this. I'm thinking about this more oftenly. Almost every show that brings you a religious person, the religious person is either the worst person, the most miserable person, or the most hated person on the show, right? Think about this. There's this like agenda to make people hate religion, to make people think that, that if you connect with God, that you're going to have a miserable life. And so we have to look at all these messages we're getting and to understand that we don't really know a person's inner state, based on how it looks from the outside. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Pertaining to what you said about what possibly makes people afraid of dhikr, it made me think of like how sometimes when you're making salah, like people don't have khushu, that concentration.
Yeah.
I think that we've all struggled with that. It's just like your mind is everywhere. And with dhikr, it could just start feeling like you're chanting, but it's not piercing your heart. Like you don't understand what you're doing. You're trying to do it. You're trying to get that feeling that everybody's like, oh my goodness, like this one is so great. You're just like, I don't feel that.
Yeah. And the thing is that we miss it's a muscle. In my work, I always use the words spiritual muscles, psychological muscles, emotional muscles. Why? Because we have these muscles that we don't cultivate. And if you look at people who practice meditation, they'll never tell you they got it from the first time. They'll never tell you that they were able to redirect their thoughts from even the first month, second month, like it takes time. Some of them, the masters of meditation, it took them years to cultivate. Right. And so, but I believe that when you sincerely walk towards Allah and you try to develop, Allah helps you. And he really and I really think it starts with, we talked last week about being in the stillness and taking moments where you're just still, where you allow quiet, you accept quiet spaces into your life, and you allow your heart to be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We just start with that, right? Start with quieting the noise and not letting prayer be the only time that we shut off the TV or shut off music or shut off, you know what I mean? Like learn to cultivate the muscle of being comfortable with quietness so that when you do start prayer, the noise of your thoughts are not so loud. But a great way to really see the sweetness of dhikr is to start with just being present with Allah, and even just, mentioning his name. I always say that there's such a miracle in the Arabic letters of even the word Allah, because, we know when you study the Arabic letters, that every letter comes from a different place. Like, kha, the kha sound comes from your throat, right? Lam comes from your tongue, right? But in Allah, right, it has a heh at the end. Right. So it's the most bottom part of your throat. It's not like ha, which comes from up here's ha, right? It comes from the lower part of your throat, closer to your heart. And I would love to do this exercise with you guys where you put your hand on your heart and just say Allah, right? And I want you to feel it like the vibration in your heart. If you just say Allah, 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 and just practice it for a few minutes and just be present with the fact that your heart responds to Allah. Your heart knows God. It seeks him. It longs him. There's a longing within all of us. That same longing is the longing that made Abraham, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam, go out in a world of idolatry where people were worshiping, statues, all around him. What made him go out and think, oh, the moon is my Lord? No, the moon is not my Lord. The sun is my Lord. No, can't be. Until he found Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in each of us, there's a longing. The heart was made to long for its creator. Just as an infant newborn is made to long for the mother, right? And so let's practice it, and let's see how you guys feel, about doing that. So let's start again. Allah, 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 Allah. And you guys continue. Yeah. What do you guys feel? Where do you feel it? Right? And it's so interesting because the letter could have come from any other place, right? But why is that this letter comes, the name of Allah comes from closer to your heart, And so this is, I've always liked to start with that if I feel a little disconnected, and, something I know that helps a lot of people too is just, being still with that name and start from there, that this heart was made to long for Allah. Now you can add more dhikr, and you can even just talk to God, right? Like remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could just be you having a sincere conversation. Allah, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Or you get good news. Like, they say when you love someone, they're the first that you want to tell your good news to, and they're the first you want to tell your bad news to, right? How many of us, when we get good news, we do sajdat al-shukr, right? The prostration of shukr. The Prophet ﷺ, whenever he'd receive good news, he would fall into prostration, thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or even, you don't have to do that, right? You're in the middle of Washington Square Park. You don't want to look, you don't want to attract too much attention. You could just say, thank you, getting good news. You get an email, makes you happy. Like, thank Allah, right? That's all forms of dhikr. It doesn't have to be so, it could let it flow, right? If he's the one you love, then you want to constantly be in connection with, right? You thank him, you have a bad day, you talk to him, right? Any questions? Yeah, sure.
What you mentioned, it might just be the metaphor tripping me up, but you said that Salah is basically our umbilical cord, but when we're born, the umbilical cord is cut. So I think that.
Well, and I meant like within the womb, right? Like if you look at this world as the womb, right? The Salah is our umbilical cord. That's what I mean. Yeah. Outside the womb. I should have been clear. Inside the womb. Yeah. That's what I mean. It's your lifeline. Like, just like as the fetus, right, it needs that umbilical cord to stay intact so it could get what it needs, its nourishment. We need to maintain that link with our creator, because there's no way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator, would create us and leave us to ourselves. Just like a mother would never want to ever leave her child to themselves, right? So how is it that he created this whole world, put us into this world, and he would never say, hey, you're on your own, because that wouldn't be a reflection of his love, right? And so Salah is one of the most foundational expressions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love for us, because he gave us a way to always stay connected to him. Comments, thoughts? Yeah.
Do you have more examples of when you use remembrance for redirection? Like, I was kind of thinking of this example in my head, like, okay, like when you're in a lot of pain and you say alhamdulillah, for example.
Yeah.
It's like literally bringing God to this to like feel better, like compliment someone, you say mashallah, like things like that.
Yeah.
So, like, do you have any more examples?
When you have a negative thought about yourself, say astaghfirullah. You teach yourself that you matter, that you actually saying something bad about yourself is also a sin, just like you saying something bad about somebody else, right? Right. And that, like, negative thinking is just because when you ask for forgiveness, it's not necessarily like the way religion is often talked about. It makes it like, sometimes it's like very shame filled, right? But it's not. It's when you ask for forgiveness for something, it's just you did something that was not in line with your fitrah. You did something that was not in line with the truth of who you are at a core level, which is we're spiritual beings having a human experience. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. Who you are is a soul. Who you are is someone that was born into this world pure, free, in line with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in line with truth, right? And so as we go through this world and we acquire different layers and we interpret things in different ways, we disconnect from our source, right? We do things that are in line with what serves us. So when we say astaghfirullah, we're acknowledging that I just did something that I transgressed my own soul, right? And you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive you for that. So why? Because your soul is valuable. And we never look at it that way. It's like when you ask for forgiveness, it's not, people think of it, oh, I'm bad, I'm asking for forgiveness, it's because I'm bad. No, it's because your soul is so important that when you do something that goes against it, you're acknowledging that. And you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive you for treating yourself so badly. And that's, I think, the purest form of self-love is when you actually realize that everything that Allah has given you is because you're valuable and you matter, you know? And so I find a great way is to say astaghfirullah, not just when you do something, you know, wrong in like to anyone, but to also yourself. You haven't negative, you find yourself beating yourself up about something. No, astaghfirullah, like, you know, alhamdulillah, you know, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, let's show compassion, you know. I hope that helps clarify.
What like advice would you give? Because I think you kind of touch on like we're in this world, we get distracted so much. And somebody else mentioned like when we're praying, like sometimes your head is in a million spaces. So like what suggestions would you give to like stay like focused? Like you said, like a moment of silence. But I think it's so hard to do that here, especially in New York.
Yeah.
Because like everything's always on the go, whether it's work, other responsibilities, just stepping out into the street. So there's like a lot of distractions. And I feel like sometimes it distracts like just reconnecting with yourself and God.
Yeah, I think it starts with inward though, like, because I think that when you build this muscle internally, you could be in the middle of a crowd and you could still be connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it definitely starts inward. It starts with taking back the power we put outside of us for peace, for instant gratification, for security. And the world we live in, a lot of people are going outward, whether it's to social media, whether it's the next, like, you know, distraction. They can't even have a still moment. You know, they're sitting with their loved ones, they're on their phone. And it's honestly like, I find that nowadays more than ever, like you have to actually take an active stance and an active commitment to change things. You know, like you can't just be like, oh, you know, I'm gonna be more present tomorrow and leave it vague. No, you actually have to identify what you're going to do to make that happen, because distractions are around us more than ever, you know, whether it's just, again, your phone, whether it's, you know, another Netflix binge, you know, it's just, you're always like, hey, do this. Hey, watch this. Hey, buy this. Like you can't even go online anymore without getting an ad for something, right? Like it's like you're constantly programmed to go outward, you know. And unless you take an active stance and say, hey, you know what, I can't continue like this. I can't be on cruise control like this because I'm robbing myself of nourishment. I'm the one who's being robbed of spiritual, mental, emotional alignment and nourishment. I'm not maximizing my life, you know. So it's actually figuring out, looking at your one day, just take it a day at a time, and what that day looks like. Go on your Instagram and see how many hours, I think it tells you right now, how many hours you're on for a day, right? Start there and be like, you know what, I'm going to minimize that to an hour, you know, 30 minutes, whatever it is. But it's looking at your day. How do I start my day? You know, like, do I pray my fajr and I just leave, like, or do I sit and I do my dhikr? You know, am I still with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Am I allowing myself to be present? You know, it's how you start your day. It's how what's your, like, the bedtime routine, right? How do you fill the gaps in your day? You know, do you check in with your heart? Do you check in with yourself? There's so many things that can help you build that muscle. Did I do a gratitude check? You know, no problem. Okay. All right, we'll wrap up here. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Thank you guys for coming, and I'll see you next week, inshallah.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.